Mr. Muhammad was making great progress until they tore down the council. Mr. Muhammad and his delegation were the talk of the United Nations. And they saw the progress that we were making at the UN. And they tore down the subcommission on human rights. So that lets you know that he was on the road to reparations. He was on the road to establishing our human rights, our collective human rights, our identity. And in this book, a retired police officer, a white retired police officer, has a chapter in that book, and he explains why white cops kill black men. He said in that book, in that chapter, that white men are really afraid of black men. That's a fact. The United Nations General Assembly adopted the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in 1966. In 1976, it became enforceable. In 1992, the U.S. Senate ratified Article 27. They also ratified the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is the law that the Honorable Silis Muhammad used to apply on behalf of Afro-descendants here in America. What does Article 27 say? In those states in which ethnic, religious, or linguistic minorities exist, persons belonging to such minorities shall not be denied the right in community with the other members of their group to enjoy their own culture, to profess and practice their own religion, or to use their own language. When you look at black people in America, especially descendants of slaves, they cannot speak their own language. They speak English. Their language were taken from them. Their ancestors' language was taken from them during slavery. Mr. Muhammad saw a law that he could apply as a basis to assist us in getting reparations. For the U.S. Senate ratified the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in 1992. The Covenant on Civil and Political Rights was established by the United Nations General Assembly in 1966, enforceable in 1976. The United States signed it in United States Senate signed it in 1992. What am I saying right now? I am saying that the U.S. Senate ratified Article 27, which gave us the basis to bring the United States government to justice. For we cannot speak our mother tongue. We cannot speak our language. And because we cannot speak our language, and America is saying you have a right to speak your language, how can you speak something that speak your language and your language was taken away from you? That's impossible. The only language we speak is English. And since the United States government cannot repair the damage, they should pay us reparations. They should pay us reparations, and they should also speak to the political leaders of the Afro-descendant nation, Afro-descendant government. That's who they should sit down and talk with. President Obama and Congress should address the Afro-descendant government. Malcolm wanted justice for his people. Malcolm was preparing a petition to take the United States before the UN, but there was no mechanism in place. Malcolm was killed or assassinated in 1965. The UN General Assembly did not adopt the International Covenant on Civil and Human Rights until 1966. The next year, Malcolm was killed prior. So that is the difference. I also would say that the Honorable Silis Muhammad fulfilled Malcolm's dream. Malcolm wanted to bring America before the UN. The Honorable Silis Muhammad is the only black man, Afro-descendant, who have made it that far into the UN. We have our own identity, Afro-descendants. Our identity change almost like the seasons. In the winter, we are called nigger. In the spring, we are called Negro. In the fall, we are called black. So it goes on and on and on. How many times do our identity supposed to change? A Chinese is a Chinese from the cradle to the grave. But what about us? Why do our identity continue to change like the seasons? It doesn't make any sense. Your name, your religion, your culture, your history, and your identity, they are your collective human rights. Your mother tongue, the right to speak your own language. When one takes your mother tongue, that's a violation of your human rights. And when the U.S. Senate ratified Article 27, they are saying that we have the right to speak our language, but how can we speak our language when our language was taken from us? How can we speak our language and our language was taken from our ancestors during slavery? The United States government is saying you have a right to speak your language. Speak it. But how can we speak it when it was taken away? And since we can't speak it, and you were the ones that took it, you got to repair the damage or pay us reparations. Repair the damage or pay us reparations. You ratified Article 27, which binds you legally. It binds the U.S. government. And she must pay us reparations based on international law. She is in violation of international law. And that is what we want our people to understand, is that she violated, and since she violated, and Mr. Muhammad took that law and applied it, The only thing we got to do now is unite behind him. Mr. Muhammad have traveled to the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, some 30 times, working on behalf of Afro-descendants in America, giving interventions before diverse UN bodies. The United States tore down the Subcommission on Human Rights and established a Human Rights Council. Mr. Muhammad was making great progress until they tore down the council. Mr. Muhammad and his delegation were the talk of the United Nations. And they saw the progress that we were making at the UN. And they tore down the subcommission on human rights. So that lets you know that he was on the road to reparations. He was on the road to establishing our human rights, our collective human rights, our identity. When we look at our identity, we are really a clone of the white man. We speak his language, we practice his culture, we worship his God. So we needed a new identity. And Mr. Muhammad saw that, and he hung his hat on that violation that America or the U.S. Senate ratified in 1992. So we want our people, black people, all across America to unite under the umbrella of the Afro-descendant government so we can go and deal with America. She must own this problem. She must pay for her wrong. In 1555, a slave was brought up out of the hold on the deck of the ship. And when he looked out at the physical terrain of America, all he could see was wilderness. Now let's fast forward to 2015. Look what you have. There was no World Trade Center, Golden Gate Bridge, George Washington Bridge, Sears Tower. None of that existed. White House, the Capitol, Washington Monument. Who carved out those roads? Who cut down those trees? Who built the White House? Who built the monument? Who built the Capitol? Our ancestors. 310 years of free labor. They suffered for 310 years. Blood, sweat, and tears. Never received any compensation for their labor. There were laws. They set up laws against the slave. There were black codes. It was against the law for the slave to own property, to own wealth. It was against the law. He could not pass anything to his offspring. And that's why there is a great economic disparity between black and white. And my people must come face to face with that reality. We are in the condition that we are in today is because your ancestors were slaves, held in chains for 310 years, not owning any property, not owning any wealth, not able to pass or will anything to their offsprings. America has to pay for that. She has to own that. As Dr. King said, and I'm paraphrasing, how can a fellow runner outrun a fellow runner in a race if he started out 300 years ahead of him economically? Dr. King answered his own question. Dr. King said it's an impossible task. And since it's an impossible task, we must deal with America. We must come together in unity as a people, regardless of your religion, regardless of your political persuasion. We all do reparations. We all are due justice. And if we don't stand up for our ancestors, we would be doing them a grave injustice. I have an undying love for black people. I could be doing something else. But I also love justice. My grandmother, who was born in 1891, told me about the last lynching in Little Rock, Arkansas, that took place in 1927. She told me about a man named James Carter. James Carter was trying to help a white woman because her wagon and her horses had ran astray. And James Carter was trying to get the reins of the horses and the wagon turned over. James Carter fled into the forest, and white men chased James Carter and brought him out of the forest. They lynched James Carter because the white woman broke her arm. They lynched James Carter. They pumped over 200 rounds in his body. They took James Carter's body down and put it behind a car, chained it to a car. And there was a 50-car caravan of white men dragging James Carter throughout the black community in Little Rock, Arkansas. I was on an airplane on my way home. I'm a grown man in my 50s at that time. And I was sitting in the car while my cousin went into a convenience store. And she asked me, "Do you want something to drink?" I said, "No, I will stay here in the car." And as I sat in the car, I looked toward the front of the store. And by the front of the store, in front of the door, next to the door, there was a newspaper stand. And I looked, and I said to myself, I hope that's not what I think it is. And my curiosity began to rage. And it raged to a point where I got out the car and went up to the newsstand. And when I looked at the front cover, there was a noose on the front cover of the newspaper. And I sat down in the car and began to read. And I remember the story that my grandmother told me. She had mentioned Big Bethel Baptist Church. And as I was reading in this article was talking about this man who was lynched and this man that was dragged. And when I got down to the paragraph, the Big Bethel Baptist Church, everything crystallized in my mind. The mob went into the church and got the church pews and burnt his body. Burn him at the stake. They called the National Guards. It was a long time before the National Guards came out. And there was a mob, about 3,000 to 5,000, had gathered there on 9th and Broadway, near Mosaic Temple. The National Guards finally came out. And there was a white man that had James Carter's arm directing traffic. And I say to you, October 31st, I will be speaking at the Mosaic Temple in the same area where James Carter was burned at the stake. I am looking forward to going home, and it will be a big homecoming for me. So I just wanted to mention some of that history. I have a book, and the title of it is Breaking Rank. And in this book, a retired police officer, a white retired police officer, has a chapter in that book, and he explains why white cops kill black men. He said in that book, in that chapter, that white men are really afraid of black men. That's a fact. And he also goes on to say that in the training academy, they teach, in this specific academy anyway, they teach that the most dangerous black man is the black man who is a member of the Fruit of Islam. And I have that book with me next door, and I can show that to you. Eric Garner, black man, selling loose cigarettes. What about the rapist? What about the robber? What about the burglar? What did Eric Garner do that was so bad that it warranted him losing his life? What did Tamir Rice do that warranted cops jumping out the car and just shooting him? I remember there was a day in time when the cops would stand behind their door. They said, drop the gun. But Tamir Rice didn't have a chance. The police jumped out and just started shooting. Michael Brown, tragic. Trayvon Martin, tragic. When you are dealing with white men, white police officers specifically, when they stop you, comply. Comply with them. If they ask you for driving license, registration, give them the driving license and registration. If he's being civil to you, you be civil to him. Don't jump out the car and say, well, why did you stop me? And especially if you don't have no belt on, if you're sagging. If you pull up your pants in the process of arguing, he gonna shoot you and say, well, you was reaching for your waistband. So black man and black woman, comply. Comply. I say that because I was in a position, the same position, over 30 years ago in Los Angeles. I was stopped by LAPD. I was driving down Imperial Highway past the Imperial Gardens. And the police pulled me to the side because I almost hit another car that was in front of me. To keep from hitting the car, I went around the car and I went through a red light. And I looked up, lo and behold, I looked up. The lights. And we crossed the tracks into an industrial area where it was dark, it was black. And the only thing that I had with me was the knowledge that I was taught by the Honorable Silis Muhammad. Obey those who are in authority over you, as long as it don't conflict with your religion. I got out the car. This is spread eagle. I spread it eagle. Having the knowledge of their nature, what was I supposed to do? Humble myself in a humble tone. Because a dog has a nature and that nature, if you provoke him, he will come off the porch and bite you. And since I had the knowledge of their nature, I had sense enough not to provoke that nature. When they ran their make, they said, sir, your license tag sticker have expired. I said, sir, that slipped my mind. They let me go. They said, have a good night. Because I act civilized. Not that I'm afraid of the police. I understand who they are and how to deal with them. Freddie Gray, tragic. Tragic situation. Killing of black men is tragic. But the problem that we have is that the black man, especially the youth, don't know the nature of the white man. If they only knew his nature, they would deal with him in a civilized way. He's a licensed killer. He has the authority to kill you. And here's another note. Some of those soldiers who returned from Afghanistan and Iraq, they are joining the police force. They are killers. So when you get out of line, when you get rebellious, it's nothing for them to kill you. So I advise my brothers to come to Muhammad's mosque and get their teachings. Come to the mosque in Philadelphia and throughout America and get that knowledge of who he is. Or just pick up Message to the Black Man. Read that information and you can benefit from it. I read that information and it benefited me. If Michael Vick had the knowledge and the history of the dog, he would not have never killed those dogs. For the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us about the history of the dog. And if Michael Vick knew that history, if he had ever read Message to the Black Man, he wouldn't have never did that. They viewed their dogs as a part of their family. His history, the dog's history, goes back some 4,000 years ago when the dog defended the white man when he lived in the hills and cave sides of Europe. And that's why they have a great love, a great affinity for dogs. Freddie Gray, crying out, and they put him in the back of that van. And Freddie Gray lost his life. And there were great unrest in Baltimore. So what we must do as black men is conduct ourselves in a civilized manner and don't break the law and don't give them a cause to stop you. And if they stop you, make sure that you're clean. Leave the drugs alone. Leave it alone. Quit shooting and killing one another because you are brothers. And when you take another brother's life, just think about it. The life that you took could have been a lawyer, a doctor, a pharmacist. He could be an astronaut, architect, engineer. So I thank you for this interview, my brother.
Thank you.
And I hope that I gave you the information that you could use.